Hello and welcome to a deeper dive with me, Dara Cam. We have a really special show for you today. October 10th will mark the 5-year anniversary of Hurricane Michael's landfall in Bay County. And we have with us today Bob Majka, Bay County County Manager, and State Rep Griff Griffits, who was the chairman of the Bay County Commission at the time Michael made landfall in the Panhandle. So we're going to talk to them about what they experienced, what they learned, and how Bay County has bounced back in the 5 years since that mega storm. Stick with us, you don't want to miss it.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
We have a really special show for you. We've got two special guests. We have Bob Majka, the county manager of Bay County, and State Rep Griff Griffits, a Panama City Beach Republican state house member who was the chairman of the Bay County Commission on October 10th, 5 years ago, when Hurricane Michael made landfall in Bay County. And so we are here to talk about what's happened in the 5 years since that Cat 5 landfall created devastation in our beautiful coastal community. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
I guess we should start out with sort of, what was the first, I don't know where you were. Were you in the EOC? Where were you when Michael made landfall 5 years ago?
So we were both in the EOC. I think that's in my experience, it's a little unique for us than for a lot of other counties in Florida. Our elected officials are part of the incident management staff. They're actually there in the EOC as part of the command staff, usually from pre-landfall to post-landfall. So we were in the EOC together, along with 4 other commissioners at the time.
That's Mr. Majka speaking there for listeners, so they know. Yeah. And so you were getting reports, I'm sure. I've been at the EOC, at the state EOC during hurricanes before, and you were getting reports were coming in. What hit you first when you went outside and looked around?
Well, I think even prior to that, I remember having a specific conversation with Griff about we were watching the forecast modeling and the tracking, and we were both here in Bay County for Hurricane Michael in '95. I remember commenting to Griff at that point in time that, Michael has taken the same path as Opal, and it's going to go through that same part of the Gulf of Mexico. And I think at that point in time, Michael was forecast to be a Category 2 at landfall, which is very similar to Opal. And then, of course, Opal increased in size to Cat 5, as Michael did. The unfortunate thing is Michael made landfall as a Cat 5 where Opal dissipated. So I remember that very specifically.
We were having lots of discussions, periodic meetings, and I remember specifically, as you know, in the EOC, all the computer screens and the weather forecasts. When it was very close to landfall is when we lost pretty much all communication with everyone. All cell towers, all radio towers were down in our part of the world, and so we were on backup generators at the EOC, and that picture was froze up on that screen for the rest of the day, and you got to see essentially the eye wall touching the Bay County proper, and that's what we saw for a long time until we were able to venture out and see what was going on.
I mean, that must have been so frightening. I was out in Biloxi after Hurricane Katrina. I spent the night in Mobile, and then we went into, my photographer and I went into Biloxi the morning after Katrina hit in Mobile. it was very similar to what you all experienced in Bay County, except that it was a water event more than a wind event. But they had no cell towers, no sewage, no electricity, so that made it very difficult. Wondering how long that was for you all to be able to communicate. But before we get there, let's talk about what happened, what you saw when you were able to go outside.
I was Bob, obviously stayed around operationally wise, and myself, another commissioner, and at the time the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, who was with us, who is now a commissioner, jumped in my truck and followed the highway patrol. We were probably the first people on the roads, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was utter devastation. You could not. We made trails with my truck. There was no way to just go down the highway as you remember it. All landmarks were gone. It was. We have some video that let's just say it brings back some bad memories from that morning after, or that afternoon of the storm, because we were on the roads probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon until dark, and then Bob and I ventured out late that evening, and he got to see it firsthand. And at that point, actually, the roads you could navigate somewhat. People had been out cutting trees and moving things, but it was still easily recognizable that we had our hands full, and it was going to be a long recovery process.
I had a tree come through my roof during Hermine, which I think was maybe a tropical storm here in Tallahassee. I'm not even sure if it was hurricane strength. And that was 7 years ago. Nowhere near what you guys went through over there in Bay County. And I still, when it rains hard, I have anxiety. I mean, my heart races. I get very anxious. My dog has now he like picks up on my anxiety. He'll lay his toys stage them all around the house because he sees me pacing around and knows something's up. So I just wonder, we just had Hurricane Idalia. I'm wondering we live in a we live in a peninsula. We get hurricanes. They're commonplace in Florida. What is 5 years later? What's it like for you and folks in your community when you hear there's something brewing in the Gulf?
Well, I think, when you have an event like this in your community, it erases all doubt about how powerful Mother Nature is. And what we've seen is, I think, as a result of really, I can't define it as anything else other than maybe post-traumatic stress. Even with the storms that come into the Gulf now, where it's just simply a tropical storm watch,
Yeah.
People are getting ready. You start seeing, before it would take maybe to get to hurricane warning stage before people would start hitting, the big box stores and stocking up on water and making their plans. Now, if a tropical storm warning is up or a watch, the shelves are cleared out at the grocery store. I mean, people take it seriously, and I think there were people prior to Michael who were here during Opal who said, after Opal they would never leave again, and I think those very same people now after Michael are saying they would never stay again, and they're not going to stay for a Cat 5. They're not even going to stay for a tropical storm. They don't want to be in the community. They'd rather go somewhere else and then be able to come back. So I think it's had a profound effect, and I think that will be conveyed to new people as they move to the community by people who were here, and hopefully that'll kind of that urban knowledge will get conveyed and that'll get shared, and people will continue to take these events more seriously than perhaps they did prior to Michael.
I think that's part of the concern, right? I'm a lifelong Floridian, second, third generation Floridian, which is probably not that long compared to some of y'all, I know. But, I grew up knowing how my family was living in South Florida during Hurricane Andrew. So I remember that. I'm old enough to remember that, and I remember, my grandparents had no water, my in-laws had no power, trying to keep everyone together. we have an influx of new people after COVID. We had a lot of new people moving to Florida. We always have a lot of people moving to Florida. I don't know how, you say you hope people convey, the people who've lived through these storms or who have experienced the damage and recovery from these storms can convey the importance of following evacuation orders and preparing. Is there any kind of concern about, new people moving into your community and maybe not taking it seriously enough?
Certainly, I mean, we experience that, all the time, and we have some pretty significant outreach programs where we're out in the community. The emergency services staff is out there speaking to as many groups as they can on a recurring basis to try to get that information out. Our media partners here really push that information out as well. But at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. There's only so much educating that you can do and informing you can do. So I think a combination of that, plus their neighbors saying, hey, I was here during Michael, and when they say leave, it means leave. I think a combination of that, hopefully. But we're always going to have a component of the community that just thinks they can ride it out and stay home, and it's unfortunate, but it's one of those contingencies we have to prepare for, because we know it's going to happen regardless.
And the truth is we had terrible wind damage during Michael, but we didn't have catastrophic failures of homes, right? Our Florida building code is a very strong building construction code, and our homes now post Andrew, really in the early 90s, is really when it beefed it up. And so while your home might survive and you might be able to ride it out, the days following the storm are awful. Mm-hmm. They are incredibly awful. My parents wrote it out. My brother wrote it out when I begged them to leave. And the next morning, when I was able to make contact with them, the first thing I said was, it is time to pack up and leave. You have no water, you have no power, and it is not going to be happening anytime soon. This is going to be several days, if not a week or more. You need to move. And at that point they do, and then it's harder to get out of town. At that point, you're probably not prepared. And I've also tell people now, lessons learned: if you're going to stay, if the recommendation is 3 to 5 days of water, you need to double that. Mm-hmm. If it says medication for that, you need to double that. You need to be overly prepared, because Michael, Idalia, these things hit parts of our community. The urban areas can survive well. We can all lean on each other. But if you're in a rural part of the state and you don't have those resources available, and it can take days to get to you, you need to have a lot of supplies on hand.
Absolutely. I was without power after Hermine for almost 2 weeks, and I was right here in Tallahassee, and a pretty, I would say, in Midtown, so that's not out in the middle of nowhere.
And it's terrible. People don't understand that living without power and water is not something most people are used to or even want to do.
Yeah, or capable of doing, and it's certainly not healthy, and it can be very, very hot, and you're traumatized at that point. I mean, let's face it, you are traumatized by hearing the trees snapping. It's the dark, there's things coming down, you don't know when it's going to end, how long it's going to last. It is a very frightening, I'm not trying to scare listeners, but it is a very, horrendous thing to live through one of these powerful storms, and then you're traumatized, you have no power, you have no water, you many times have no way of communicating, and that's what you all were faced with 5 years ago.
We had catastrophic failure of every first world convenience that we had. It was gone. We were in the Stone Age. Our first responders couldn't talk unless they were in line of sight of each other. It was everybody learns now after the storms, after Irma and these other ones we've had over the last years. You see Starlink is immediately placed in these areas, so communication's restored. We didn't have that. These are things that are always, after a big event, you always learn something new. The book is kind of rewritten. And that's one of those things that I think after Michael, we had complete failure at every level. And so we had to figure that out.
It's so interesting. I was just looking at my questions, and that was exactly going to be my next question was the kind you had systemic failures on every kind of infrastructure front, right? So you had systems damages too, including to healthcare systems and the school system. It's complicated because there are so many pressure points that I just rattled off a few of them. But overall, what was the total economic damage to Bay County?
In the billions, easily in the billions of dollars. Um, and post event, kind of, jumping off to maybe, another subject. One of the things that helped us with that was really the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the fact that the state stayed open helped our recovery. I can remember, our shoulder season here traditionally starts in the November timeframe, and I can remember going home from work one night, and every entertainment venue, the parking lot was full. I mean, the mini golf and the race tracks,
Right.
and I mean, just everything. I called our TDC director and I was like, "Do we have like a big, baseball tournament going on this weekend or something?" He was like, "No, all these people are here because they're from states that have closed down and they can't go to work. They're teleworking. Their kids can't go to school. They're going remotely. So they chose to come down here to their vacation properties or their investment properties and live and work from their beach house or their beach condo. Their kids could go to school. And the season really, I think my estimation was like really for 2 years. We never really had a break in the season, and it never slowed down. So that was a fundamental part of our recovery, was having that injection of cash flow, if you will, into the community. And we had a significant benefit from all the responders coming immediately after the storm, and staying, because the beach was not impacted as severely. Those properties were available. So while we didn't have the traditional tourism dollar coming from the visitor perspective, we had the ability to house those responders here, and those property owners were still allowed or were able to generate income because those rooms were being rented out. That was still being interjected into our economy, and it really did help reduce the sting.
And you always do get an economic boost in post-storm with rebuilding and reconstruction projects too. So you had that, but then as a manager and as a commissioner with COVID, you had another disaster to deal with. I mean, it still was a pandemic, whether you were open or closed. People were getting sick. Hospitals were, your hospitals were still like trying to, what was your healthcare situation like when COVID arrived in town?
It was better. I would say we have struggled since Michael at the healthcare levels. Both hospitals were closed after Michael. They were both, neither hospital evacuated until the day after. It was a mass evacuation from both hospitals. They were heavily damaged. They have both rebuilt and are doing very, very well now. But we have struggled since then. During the pandemic, they were overwhelmed at some levels, I think, as most hospitals in the state were. That 60 days was the hardest 60 days, I think. I think it was harder than the hurricane, in my opinion, in some levels, because post-hurricane, everybody had the same mindset about fixing, cleaning up, recovery. We were all running down the same page. Where COVID, it was a 50-50 of who mask, no mask, close, don't close.
Right.
We just, and all these public health questions were being placed on elected officials that don't have any public health experience. And we were having to listen to outside influences trying to tell us what to do. It was very, very difficult. But I think, we were pretty, I think we did as best we could under the circumstances. We didn't know what was out there. It was such the ghost, the shadow lurking out there. Nobody knew. And so after that 60 days, when the governor finally said short-term rentals are back open and our beaches were back open, um, our community went back to work. We went back to work fast, and I feel like it really hasn't slowed down much since those days. And like, what is that? Early 2020.
And I think the impact of Michael on the community prepared us for the pandemic. I think it was, people talk about it being a 1-2 punch, but I think because the community went through Michael and saw that devastation, the pandemic was certainly, a struggle.
Yeah.
But I think they were able to compare that to, okay, hey, I just went
Right.
through losing my home and maybe losing my business or losing my job in Michael. And so, yes, here is this other thing in the community that's having an impact. But scale wise, we dealt with Michael. We'll roll through the pandemic, which the community did, I think, very well.
And the relationships with all the municipalities, our 7 municipalities, because of the hurricane, had always been strong. But when you really have to get all together and work, so when the pandemic was starting up, we had an operational group of leaders in the community that met weekly to discuss the issues of the week. And it was I think we learned a lot after Michael, and I think it's done extremely well to continue on that tradition. I think it paid us dividends for sure during the pandemic.
I feel like, and I hope this doesn't come across as condescending or patronizing or anything, but I've lived in North Florida for most of my life now. And I was in Perry. I spent the day in Taylor County the other day. And I feel like there is a grit and determination that is part of being a rural north rural Floridian. And now, not I understand not everyone lives in a rural area in Bay County, but there is some sort of like get her done kind of attitude that you know what I mean, like and at the same time, these kinds of disasters, they can bring out the best in people and they can also bring out the worst in people.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, there are probably too many stories to recount about the resiliency of this community, but and we probably could never quantify the value or the savings in time or the savings and resources. But just to recount one story, post event, my fire rescue crews were going into communities doing welfare checks. There's a process by which people from outside the community call in, they call the Red Cross, or, we get a list generated of, hey, I can't get a hold of so-and-so, can somebody go check on them? Mm-hmm. And this one particular case, we sent an engine company into a community. The road was blocked. Our folks were going to have to get out. It probably would have been a 4-hour ordeal for them to get out, unload everything they needed, walk in there, check to see if this individual was fine, and come out. And when they stopped there, the residents at that point came out of their house and said, what can we help you do? And my crew said, we're looking for so-and-so. And they said, we'll go handle that. And you just make sure somebody comes back here and checks with us, and we'll let you know the outcome. And the value of that engine company being freed up to go to their next service call, and the citizens that live in that neighborhood being willing to participate and go check on that resident, I mean, it's phenomenal. And you just saw that. I mean, people, in today's society with, people come home from work, they go inside, they get in their car,
go in through their garage, right?
Yeah. They don't know their neighbor.
Right.
And if anything, what this event did was you had people who lived in neighborhoods who didn't know the person that they lived next to for maybe 5 or 10 years. All of a sudden, they're inviting that person into their house because that neighbor got their home, the roof's gone. They're feeding them, they're socializing. There's that sense of community gets built. To your point about you see the best in people. It's phenomenal here, and it's not just. It doesn't just occur when things happen here. The very first thing that happened when landfalls and post years were happening in other parts of the state is the sheriff and I are on the phone together, and it's all about how can we get into these other communities and return the favor. So it's about helping our neighbors, one, return the help that we got, but two, it's just part of the DNA here. It's just always been that way. It doesn't matter whether it's another part of Florida or another part of the country. This community just rises up and pulls together, and works together, and gets things done. Finds a way to make things happen. And I think that's been part of the DNA in our recovery process. I think we use the term recovery as a marathon, And I think we're further ahead in almost 5 years than I expected us to be. But I mean, we're rocking and rolling as a community. We still have a long way to go. But things are happening, and the community came together after the event. We got their input on long-term recovery plan. We're executing those projects to bring the community back as the dollars are becoming available from FEMA or HUD or the state, depending on which partner we're working with. And it's happening. I think the key there is, though, it's patience. I mean, you just have to. It's frustrating sometimes because you want to execute really quickly, but then you're waiting for some other agency or some other partner to come get through their process. So patience is key, but it's everybody's leaning forward and making things occur.
I feel like you guys maybe are in my computer because you're saying all my questions, you're answering them before I'm asking them, which is great. That it shows you what a great interviewer I am, and what fabulous guests you are. I was going to ask you if you had one story that you could share, an anecdote, and you shared the one about the engine. I'm assuming that's a fire rescue team that was freed up.
We had the hospital story. One of the hospitals, the hospitals have their incident command, their plans in place. Well, Bay Medical was completely locked down with trees. Nobody could get in and out. They come outside and there was this random group of guys with chainsaws cutting a path for the ambulances to come in and out. Nobody ever found out who they were, never got a name. To this day, I don't think anybody knows. They cut a path for the ambulances to get in to evacuate that hospital. Just things like that. And that's just one of hundreds and hundreds of stories of goodwill that was passed along during, especially in those first few days.
Yeah, those first few days are really that's critical, to feel like you're not completely cut off from the rest of the world and like someone is going to help you. It's just, I know what that's like. I mean, I remember being in Biloxi when people were coming to where their houses had been. There were just blocks of rubble on the beachfront there where the casino barges had been, and they were people looking for formula and diapers, and and like I said, my photographer and we had tuna fish we had brought with, we were giving out our own food because we knew we could go back to Mobile and restock or whatever. But it is heartwarming to hear stories of people coming together. We'll be right back with Bob Majka, Bay County County Manager, and State Rep Griff Griffits talking about Hurricane Michael.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. I'm wondering, speaking of community, though, sometimes people just can't afford to rebuild. They can't find jobs. They don't get enough insurance coverage. Maybe they don't have insurance coverage. How, if at all, did the demographics or the population of Bay County change in the aftermath of the storm? Did people move away, and a lot of people move away and not come back, or what's happened?
Not a lot. I think probably the biggest demographic shift that we saw was people moved out of the municipalities into the unincorporated area, and then some moved into adjoining counties over the short term. And then as recovery took place, some, not all of those people came back, but we saw population growth in the unincorporated area of the county, not because more people moved here, but because that's where there was housing and jobs. People could move out of their municipal boundaries and into the unincorporated area.
That's also
And
a
we lost.
COVID thing too, I think, though. I think a lot of rural communities saw some growth during COVID because people were working from home and they wanted to get away from urban lockdowns and things like that. I think that might be part of a COVID thing too.
Well, we were really concerned because the census was taking place that
Oh,
year.
right.
So we were concerned that we were going to be impacted by reimbursement rates at the federal level. And so there we met with the Census Bureau in DC about actually paying for a follow-up census if needed based on a major loss in population, but it really wasn't that much. It was only a couple of percentage points.
Yeah.
And then, shortly after that, when COVID hit and you have 1,000 people a day move to the state, we've since, I think, rebounded pretty healthy. We're pretty healthy right now.
We're back. We're significantly higher full-time population wise above where we were pre-Michael. And then because I think primarily because of COVID, we've been discovered by other geographical locations in the country who traditionally have not been visitors to our area. I can tell you, and Griff could maybe speak better to this than I, because he's got more experience in the tourism realm. But I can very rarely remember pre-Michael hardly ever seeing a license plate from New York or Vermont or Connecticut.
Right.
And now, you can't drive down the
It's
street
common
here without seeing 24 of them a day. And so we've been discovered by those markets.
Right.
And so they're visiting here. They're now choosing to retire here. We have one subdivision that's come online since the storm. They're having to limit themselves to constructing 600 new homes a year because of logistical problems, that everybody's experiencing throughout the
Right.
country with getting materials and then workforce shortages. They could be knocking out 1,000 units a year.
Wow.
And they have a waiting list. And so we have people from other markets who have
That's
discovered us who are coming. The growth is exponential.
Well, they may want to go over to Taylor County and try to hire some workers.
Well, that may be. We'd be glad to have them. If they'd like to come here, we'd be glad to have them over here. Absolutely.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Representative Griffiths.
No, it's just he's right. We have. I feel like we're at the tip of the spear. We if there is a silver lining with a storm of any type, we're starting to see it with all the new construction coming online. All the folks that have discovered us are bringing quality to Bay County with their construction. We have a lot of new homes that are popping up that, the home prices it's really unaffordable at some level. But that's not necessarily a bad problem to have. We talk about our traffic issues in a tourism community. Traffic's kind of a good thing. So we talk about that. We're very blessed and humble, but also recognize that 5 short years ago, things changed. 72 hours from the time that storm was named till it made landfall. And so we recognize things can change quick. And when it gets to this time of the year, I watch the Weather Channel a little closer in that southern Gulf. Opal was October 5th. Michael was October 10th. These first 2 weeks of October are a little nerve-wracking for us here in the Bay County.
What did Idalia, was there any nail biting when Idalia was making its way?
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, when you're inside that cone at all, you pay attention.
Yeah.
Start watching close.
I'm doing it. I moved. I live in a different house now. I have a little bunker. That's my office, is where we're recording right now. And it has definitely, even that one, like I said, it's no comparison to what you went through, but it changed the way I respond to what I see on the Weather Channel, for sure.
When Ian hit in Fort Myers last
Right.
year, I've shared our CFO Petronas. Just like us, after Michael hit, we had other communities come in to speak to us. I remember Monroe County specifically, and people from the Katrina area coming to speak to us just about what we were going to go through over the 1 month, 6 month, 1 year kind of thing. And so CFO Petronas asked me to come down to Fort Myers to speak to their county commission, just to give them a pep talk. It was day 8. And I remember, I know what they were going through. You see their faces. You need those support mechanisms of people around the community, around the state and the Southeast, really, to help you to teach and lean on each other. And that's why when any storm hits, our community, we're up and ready to go help anytime, anywhere, because we couldn't have done it without the people that came and helped us. They were from all over the country. We had forestry units from Oregon in here helping us. And what they do in their 2-week turns is pretty amazing and impressive to watch. And so we're always really, ready to go help out.
Right. Most recently, 2 weeks ago, I had staff on a conference call with our counterparts in Maui, and just talking to them what happened with the wildfire.
Right.
And just really, it was an opportunity for us to ask them questions about, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And again, it's just an opportunity. You're not in the mode of telling them what they need to do or how they need to do it. It's just, these are the things that impacted us here. And oh, by the way, here are the 15 things we never thought we'd have to think of.
What's one of those things? What's one of those 15 things that you never thought you'd have to think of?
Where was I going to go get $500 million from to be able to start picking up debris?
The debris was a big issue.
How are we going to do this? Yeah, first question. How do we pick up all the mess?
Yeah, that was 110% of our annual budget, our entire annual county budget.
Wow.
$500 million was just for the county. That did not include these 7 municipalities here. That was just the initial estimate from the Corps on what our bill was going to be.
Wow.
And I can remember sitting down with our CFO and saying, listen, I need you to go start putting a plan together on how we can talk to our creditors about where we're going to get this money from. And the first meeting I went to, I thought, I fully expect to get laughed out of that room. I expect to go in there and say, hey, I need $500 million to do this. And how are we going to do it? I just expected them to laugh and say, yeah, that's not going to happen.
In your dreams.
And it was amazing because of the county's credit worthiness and our financial standing in the community. It was like, we've got a plan.
Wow.
And they mapped it out right there. We were able to execute on that. You don't typically think in that scale. I mean, it's going to be large, but
Right.
$500 million. We had a $30 million reserve, and I think Griff and I had that appropriated, assigned to stuff probably within the first 2 hours.
Oh my goodness.
It was just money was, we had to line it up to get things moving. And of course, if you're familiar with the system, you have to pay first and get reimbursed later.
Yes.
And these are follow-on conversations that we had as late as last year. We were talking to the Senate last year about in response to challenges that Ian was presenting for communities downstate. That's probably a thing that long-term communities need to be thinking of. We tend to think of the hazard and vulnerability part. We know we're vulnerable to hurricanes. We know they're going to be high frequency. We know they can be high impact. Okay, so the storm hits, now what? And the answer can't be stick your hand out. I can't look to Griff every time and say, I need you to get money appropriated for me to go take care of what I know as a community is going to affect me. So how do we as a community, I think we have an obligation to our partners at the state to say, here's our liability and here's what we as a community can handle. This is what we can fund, and give them a snapshot at the state level of this is what's going to be unmet. And that helps them make decisions. Is the CAT fund large enough? Is the rainy day fund in Tallahassee, is $3 billion large enough to do that? It might be when you have 7 rural counties in Northwest Florida hit. It may not be near enough when it's a Dade, or or if it comes up and it starts in Dade and it goes out through Duval.
If Hurricane Michael hits Miami-Dade, Hillsborough, Pinellas, the damage would have. I don't know that it would. I call us the forgotten storm at time, because right after that was the California wildfires. We're kind of, I think the entire population of Hurricane Michael's paths, less than 800,000 people. Where Ian hit, Lee County has 800,000 people. So it's just different population wise. And we were kind of forgotten about. It was 180 plus days, I think, before we had a federal declaration for a
Wow.
disaster. And so we were fighting all day, every day for it. Some of the, you talk about the lessons we didn't know, or the 15 things we didn't know.
Yes.
There were hundreds. The one thing you'll never know and never be able to explain or understand is FEMA. It is, they use more acronyms than the military or the hospitals. I've said this in interview after interview after interview. The bureaucracy of FEMA is impressive, and that's not a compliment. It's not a compliment.
Right.
It is amazing how that process works. Now, granted, it is ripe with fraud. We understand that, and that's why it is the way it is. And that's why it's so critically important to foster super good relationships with those people, and the people that you're working with, what I call reimbursement specialists, that are making sure everything is documented to the point so that when the county submits it, there's no kickback. FEMA can come back 10 years later and claw your money back. So they can give you 10 million and 9 years later come back and take it back from you. And that could bankrupt some small communities.
Of course.
And to think that the debris we had was so extensive, every time a debris hauler picked up a debris and put it in his truck, there's a ticket. He takes it to the side, he drops it off, there's a ticket. Those tickets have to match. Then they're documented. They're all put together. We had hundreds of millions of debris tickets, hundreds of millions, that had to be documented, signed, sealed, delivered, perfection, or you don't get your money. So that workload is something that people have no idea what is entailed with all that when it comes down to it. It's amazing to see the people that have to organize that. I would hate to have to be in that process. It would be horrible.
Sure, but then not that I want to defend red tape, but you need to have some guardrails in place. Otherwise, you run the risk of people, pocketing the money. And then once that happens, you guys know, I mean, there's the risk of that, right? So,
but as a result of that, one of the things the legislature created as a tool, which is beneficial, is as Griff said, there's waste, fraud, and abuse, and that's why there are all these levers and these hoops that have to be gone through to protect the taxpayer, because it's public money that's being used to fund this. But what's happening right now, as a result of action taken in last session, is we're all, as counties and cities, going through this through this regulatory process, where, and I'll use the term credit rating, just as a common terminology, but we're all essentially going to end up with a credit rating at the end of this process, and that will help the state and FEMA understand where the high risk and low risk communities are at. And those of us who have been through disasters before, who have demonstrated that we're capable, we're honest, we're not a risk, we'll have a rating that allows the state and FEMA to get money advanced to us quicker than, say, another community that, I mean, they may get a lower rating just because they don't have any experience. They've not been through the process before.
right.
And so they're going to get a little more scrutiny. And then you're going to have those communities that have been through the process and have had clawbacks and have had issues with waste, fraud, and abuse, and they're going to get another rating, and the way money flows to them might be a little slower. And so I think that will, it'll make sense. It'll be paced so the people with experience that have a good track record can move faster, and more resources that need to be paying attention to those areas, those communities that are more vulnerable or higher liability, they can get more scrutiny. And I think overall the end result will be the taxpayer will be protected, because FEMA doesn't see anybody other than the state of Florida. So when FEMA comes back and they want $10 million back, they're not looking at Bay County. They're looking at the state of Florida, and the state of Florida is responsible to pay that money back. We have, through our funding agreements with Tallahassee, we're signing on to meet the obligation, and the state has checks and balances in their ability to withhold revenue from counties and cities to make sure the taxpayers are protected. So it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that, we're not putting garbage into the system, and we're not cluttering the system up and causing problems for our state and federal partners. We were successful in convincing the state and FEMA to change their audit process after Hurricane Michael. Prior to Michael, the audit process was line by line. So the 500 million tickets that Griff was just referencing for debris removal, under the pre-Michael system, every single individual ticket, 100% of an audit had to be done.
That's bananas.
Before the would flood.
That's
okay?
bananas.
Yeah. So we were able to convince FEMA and the state to do a statistical analysis, percentage-wise.
Right.
So the threshold, the red flag, the trigger threshold for error was set at 20%. I don't know who set that. If I'm a lending institution, I think that's probably pretty high.
It's pretty high.
Somebody money that had a 20% chance they were not
error rate, 20% error rate. Yeah, pretty high.
We agreed to it. FEMA and the state came in independently and did a random. We gave them our entire data set. They did random independent analysis on data that they picked out, and our error rate was less than 3%.
Wow.
And they turned around and they advanced us $80 million right off the top.
Yeah. And that you got to think small communities who spent their money cleaning up their streets and debris are now they've kind of their credit cards maxed out, and 5 years later they're still looking to me for appropriation requests on facilities, whether it's we have a small community here whose fire station is still in double wide trailers.
Wow.
Their equipment is in a metal container behind that fire station. If there's a tornado warning, they have to evacuate the fire station in a small municipality. And they spent $14 million cleaning up their streets. So there's got to be a better path forward for rural small communities and these small municipalities to try to advance this a little faster. That interest, we borrowed $300 million very quickly. That interest is not reimbursable. That clock has been ticking since probably October 20th, 2018. And it's going to keep ticking until that interest is paid off.
Wow.
And a lot of people may not understand, with every event, FEMA creates what's called a public assistance program guide. So the program guide written for Michael is not the same program guide that applied to Ian.
Right.
Or the next storm. So one of the things we learned is what you need to pay attention to as a community post-event is you need to get your federal elected officials together and make sure they're paying attention going into that program, because interest is a good example. Under federal law, FEMA has the option to include the federal regulation says FEMA may reimburse disaster-related interest.
Oh, wow.
In our program guide, they chose not to. And so one of the conversations we've been having with our elected representatives at the federal level is, at some level, that word may should change to shall.
Right.
It's probably not relevant for every single event. And it may be different for a small community, like a Perry or a Mexico Beach, or an Alpha community.
Right.
It may make sense in every event where they're hammered for that to be a shall. But for us, maybe tropical storms up to category 2, category 3, maybe it stays a shall. But certainly a catastrophic event like this, that should not be an option.
Right.
Because we're putting our skin in the game, which we should do. That didn't change until the late 70s. Prior to the late 70s, the federal government just wrote the check. And when the Stafford Act was passed, local communities are required to put skin in the game. And I think there's value in that. I think it keeps the waste down to a certain level, but it makes you accountable. But when it's catastrophic and you're going to put your skin in the game, we went out and borrowed $300+ million, and we're going to pay that back. We've got about 65% of our cost reimbursed. And when I say reimbursed, I mean actually back on our side of the balance sheet. The balance of that is over in Tallahassee. It's moved from FEMA to the state, and the state is going through their audit process. We've paid back roughly 150 million of that 300 million. We have the balance of that due in March of next year. And so we're working diligently to try to get that money back on our side of the balance sheet, so that literally within 5.5 years, our goal is to try to have all that paid back in 5.5 years. And then what we'll have to be focusing on is how do we get the House and the Senate at the federal level to get us reimbursed for that interest.
For the interest.
We could mathematically come out of this out of pocket. This disaster costing the county $10 million plus that interest cost.
Wow.
Out of a $500 million event. And we're responsible for 12.5%. We'll be far, far south of 12.5% because we've had other sources of revenue to go to. Our insurance proceeds. I have $40 million in insurance proceeds sitting on my side of the balance sheet right now that I've not deployed because I want to make sure that I don't have to pass that burden on the taxpayers if that time comes. And so there's $106 million sitting over in Tallahassee right now that's due us. And so if I put that 40 million with that, I'm 4 million shy of paying off the remainder of my debt.
Well, that ain't bad.
And then I have to get on top of that. So we'd love to be in that scenario come March.
And Tallahassee and mostly DEO over there, it's sometimes they've had a lot going on. They don't quite have all the rules written for the money to flow. So government is like turning a battleship, right? It's slow. Probably for certain reasons it's that way. And but I'm hopeful the DEO will get that money pushed out here pretty quickly by the last quarter or the first quarter of next year.
Well,
you can't.
I was
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you because the House does have a resiliency committee. Are you on that resiliency committee?
No, actually, it's funny you say that. I was not asked to sit on that, and I got my feelings hurt.
Yeah, my feelings are hurt for you.
I cannot believe they did not ask me to sit on that. And so I asked the chairman of that, Leader Grant, and he looked at me. He said, I didn't want to bore you with all the things you already know. And the truth is I watched just about every committee meeting. Bob actually came and spoke to the Senate House or the Senate side version. And it really, all they're doing is kind of continuing ed of what we've been living for 5 years. And so I'm very thankful he did not place me on that committee now, because I think I would have probably grown bored sitting there just learning what they are now learning. And but what he has done and what it's allowed my counterparts around the state with Ian and Idalia is to just talk about the challenges that I faced at the local level and the state level, and how some have been fixed and how there's still some problems out there that we need to continue to work on and try to correct.
That's what I was going to ask you, is what recommendations would you make to a committee like that, or what recommendations would you make to the legislature for how the interest thing I think is a federal change that needs to be made, but what recommendations would you make to how to make it easier for communities and counties to bounce back and respond?
Well, so maybe one suggestion would be rural counties are treated a little differently than those of us that are considered financially sound. That most rural counties are considered, fiscally constrained counties, and so the state looks at them a little different. So Idalia, that runs through Perry and all these Taylor and Jefferson counties, the state pretty much steps in through DOT or the Corps of Engineers and takes care of all their debris hauling, right? As I was talking about our smaller cities here, the difference in a smaller city and a rural county is just geography, really. They're both fiscally constrained. So our smaller cities maybe need to be treated like some of our fiscally constrained counties, and maybe they have to just kind of fall under the guise of the county. We talked about a lot of different things after Michael about, utility authorities and things like that would just kind of expedite the process in a recovery. These small cities don't have the staffing. I remember sitting around a table after Michael with the Florida Water Resource Network folks, FLAWARN, which is essentially they're not the power line guys, but they're the water guys. They're the same first responders that come to town that I'll talk about with FP&L. Well, your water guys are here too, from around the state. And the woman coordinating the meeting was asking each municipality what they needed. And so she would say, Bob, what do you need? And he'd say, I need 10 chainsaws, 4 generators, and 10 men to help me cut paths to lift stations or whatever. And those are questions that we can answer, and we're ready to go. These smaller municipalities, they were still
They don't
in
know
the
what
fog
they
of
need.
war.
They don't know
They didn't.
what they need.
Most of the time, their employees did not even show back up to work.
Wow.
They didn't know where to start or where to even begin.
Right.
And so I think there should be maybe some sort of mechanisms to try to figure that out. And then last year we voted at the legislature to appropriate $700 million for short-term recovery loans for communities that can use it as a bridge. I don't think we put enough thought into that. I think it's only like it's a 12-month bridge loan. You're never going to get reimbursed in 12 months after a storm like that. And if a community is having to come to the state to borrow money, it most likely means that their banker or their banks are not lending it to them. So if they're not lending it to them and the state is the lender of last resort, expecting that community to be able to pay back in a year is probably not practical. And so I think there's some tweaks we have to make to think about to just try to help out. The state wants to deal with 67 counties, not 410 cities or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So they just want to deal with the 67 counties. And I think there probably needs, it's more work, it's more stress on the counties. But at the end of the day, they probably can do it better, and it would probably take some stress off the little guys a little bit as well.
That's
the floor warrant situation. I mean, each city had to execute their own contract with floor warrant. So between the county
That's
and
the
7
water,
cities,
the water.
that's 8 individual contracts that had to be executed just so those expenses would qualify for reimbursement, as opposed to if the process allowed me to execute the contract and provide the services and then just have to account for what occurred in each individual city.
Yeah.
That
a lot of replication of effort.
We're the
there.
The county's the wholesale water provider for our municipalities. And we had water provided to our cities within 7, 8, 9 days, within a little over a week. But there were other smaller municipalities that couldn't provide the water to their citizens for another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, simply because they just don't have the manpower, the staff. They had folks that packed up and evacuated that they never saw again, never came back to work.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Well, guys, this has been fascinating speaking with you. I guess you all probably have some events planned for the 5-year. Anniversary sounds like something to celebrate. So I don't know. Commemoration.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything. Listen, I don't want to relive it. I don't want to think about it. I like to have it in the rearview mirror. I've got a book on my desk that the paper put together that says Michael that I don't think I've opened ever. It's rearview mirror stuff, and we focus on the future.
Yeah, we have an educational opportunity going on in our main library here.
I saw that.
It showcases recovery, and that really is our focus. We didn't want to focus on the event and the damage that it caused. Our focus is on how far the community has come over the last 5 years. And then there's general information that can teach people about hurricanes in general and what they can do, and the different educational things you would typically see. But our focus has been to try to get people to hone in on all the work that this community has done over the last 5 years, everything the residents have done, and how much, and really not try to spend any time reminiscing about what happened on that specific day 5 years ago.
Well, Bob Majka, Bay County Manager, State Rep Griff Griffits, Panama City Beach, the former chairman of the Bay County Commission. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.